Welcome back to the deep dive. I am really thrilled you're joining us today. We're kicking off something special, a series really focused on helping you prepare for the CSWIP 3.1 Welding Inspector Exam. Think of this as your essential toolkit. We want to give you not just answers, but that deeper understanding you need, to feel really confident. Imagine you're out there, job site, something's failed, or maybe a new procedure needs approval. Our mission, equip you to diagnose, prevent defects, make those critical calls, and we'll do it using real exam-style questions to sort of anchor our discussion on core concepts.
And that's absolutely the right way to frame it. This isn't about rote memorization, not at all. We want you to grasp the why. Why is this the right answer? Why does this principle matter? Because these questions, they open doors to the foundational knowledge, the stuff that empowers you, for the exam, but also for making solid, informed decisions out in the field. So let's stop talking about it and actually, dig in.
Okay, let's jump right into the kind of puzzle you might actually face. You're inspecting, say, a fractured component, trying to figure out what went wrong. Often, the first clue, maybe the most telling, is how it broke. So our first question dives right into this, into material behavior. Question 1 is, ductile fracture, A, would have a rough, randomly torn fracture surface and a reduction in area. B, would have a smooth fracture surface displaying beach marks. C, would have a step-like appearance. D, would have a bright crystalline fracture surface with very little reduction in area. So looking at those options, what really jumps out, what are we actually looking for with a ductile failure? Right.
The correct answer here, it's definitely would have a rough, randomly torn fracture surface and a reduction in area. The key thing, the insight here is that ductile fracture means material absorbed a lot of energy. It deformed plastically before it broke. You literally see this as necking, where the cross-section at the break gets visibly smaller. That plastic flow, it means energy was absorbed, and because it stretched and pulled, the fracture surface looks rough, fibrous, torn. It's not a clean break. And this isn't just academic. It tells you something about how much warning you might get before failure. Ductile materials often deform quite a bit first.
Right, that visual cue, the warning.
Exactly. Unlike brittle failure, which can be sudden, catastrophic even. And just quickly on the others to show the contrast. Option B, smooth surface beach marks. That's classic fatigue failure. Cyclic loading. Option C, the step-like look. That might suggest, brittle modes like cleavage or maybe specific stress states. And D, bright, crystalline, very little reduction in area. That's your textbook brittle fracture. Minimum plastic deformation, crack just zips through. Understanding these differences is just, crucial for diagnosing failures in the real world. Tracing back to the cause.
That distinction, the warning versus sudden snap, that's huge for diagnosis. It really shows how visual inspection plus knowing the why of the failure mechanism is key. But knowing how things fail leads right to, how do we prevent it? And talking about preventing specific weld defects, one that crops up, especially in critical stuff, is lamellar tearing. So question 2, lamellar tearing, A, can be prevented by the use of plate materials containing low levels of impurities. B, can be prevented by the use of buttering runs. C, is best prevented by post-weld stress relief. D, both A and B are correct. Okay, so for this one, this insidious defect, what are the best ways to fight it?
This is a really practical one. The answer is D. Both A and B are correct. Lamellar tearing. It's nasty. It happens under the weld, often parallel to the plate surface. And it's mainly down to non-metallic inclusions. Impurities, like manganese sulfides that get flattened out when the steel is rolled, creates weak planes. Then, when welding puts stress through the thickness perpendicular to those weak planes, the material can literally tear apart internally. What's really tricky is it's often hidden. You might not see it right away. It can grow under load, only showing up later. A real hidden enemy.
Hidden enemy, that makes prevention even more critical.
Absolutely. So let's look at why A and B work. Option A, using cleaner steels, low impurities. That tackles the root cause directly. If you use steel with fewer of those inclusions, especially steel tested for Z-direction properties, you just reduce the susceptibility hugely. Like an old mentor used to say, you can't weld bad steel good, but you can weld good steel bad. Really sticks with you that. Material quality matters. Then option B, buttering runs. That's a procedural fix. You basically lay down a buffer layer of tougher weld metal on the surface before you make the main joint. This buffer absorbs and spreads out the welding stresses, isolating the main weld from that susceptible base metal. Stops the tear from starting.
Okay, so one attacks the material, the other the procedure.
Exactly. And option C, post-weld stress relief. Well, it can help reduce residual stress, sure, but it's not the primary prevention for lamellar tearing. The root cause is more about the material's internal structure and how you lay down that first weld bead. So yeah, understanding that interplay material choice and procedure is fundamental for preventing defects.
It really does show the foresight needed, doesn't it? Precision matters. Now, let's switch gears slightly. Carbon in steel. It's fundamental in metallurgy, huge implications for welding. I've heard it called a bit of a double-edged sword for properties. Can you unpack that? What actually happens when you up the carbon content? Question 3. Increasing the carbon content of a steel. Okay. Increase the hardness and toughness. B, decrease the hardness and toughness. C, increase hardness, decrease toughness. D, decrease hardness, increase toughness. So yeah, what's the deal here for the material's properties and, its weldability?
Ah, yes, the classic trade-off. The correct answer is C, increase hardness, decrease toughness. See, carbon is the main hardener in steel. Add more carbon, you get more carbides forming in the microstructure. These carbides, they're hard, they're brittle, they act like tiny obstacles, stopping dislocations from moving easily. That's how metals deform plastically. So more obstacles mean more resistance to deformation. That directly means higher hardness, higher tensile strength.
Okay, stronger, harder. But there's a downside.
Exactly. That strength comes at a cost. Reduced ductility, reduced toughness. Think about those hard, brittle carbides. They can be points where cracks start easily. Makes the steel more prone to brittle fractures, like having something very strong but very rigid. It takes a lot of static load, but give it a sharp knock and impact. It might shatter instead of bending. So hardness goes up, but toughness, the ability to absorb energy before breaking, generally goes down. And this balance, this trade-off, is so critical in steel design and welding, especially thinking about things like hydrogen cracking, cold cracking. Higher carbon also means you need more preheat, maybe post-weld heat treatment to manage those risks.
That balance is just crucial then for picking the right steel and knowing how to weld it. It's not just about strength. Okay, let's pivot again. Process identification, a core skill for any inspector. This next question describes a specific setup, gives us a few clues. Question 4. A welding process where the welding plant controls the travel speed and the arc gap, but under constant supervision using a shielding gas mixture of 80% argon, 20% carbon dioxide is termed A, a manual mag process, B, a semi-automatic mag process, C, a mechanized mag process, D, a mechanized mag process. All right, what are the giveaways here? The clues pointing us to the right classification.
This is a great one for careful reading. Like detective work, the correct answer is D. A mechanized mag process. Let's break down those clues because each bit tells us something important. First part. The welding plant controls the travel speed and the arc gap, but under constant supervision. The key phrase, welding plant controls. That immediately tells you it's mechanized. In mechanized welding, a machine handles those key things, speed, arc length, but an operator is still there, watching, supervising, maybe tweaking things. That's different from manual, where the welder controls everything by hand. Different from fully automatic, where there's basically no human intervention during the weld.
And semi-automatic.
Semi-automatic usually means the wire feed is automatic, but the welder is moving the torch, controlling the travel speed manually. So plant controls point strongly to mechanized.
Okay, clue 1, mechanized. What about the gas?
All right, clue 2. Shielding gas mixture of 80% argon, 20% carbon dioxide. This mix, especially the CO2 part, makes it an active gas mixture. Carbon dioxide reacts with the weld pool. It's not inert. Active gas means metal active gas welding, or MAG. If it was metal inert gas, MIG, you'd expect 100% argon, or maybe an argon-helium mix, something that doesn't react. So put the clues together. Mechanized for the control aspect and MAG from the active gas, you get option D. Being able to spot this stuff quickly is fundamental for checking against a WPS for troubleshooting. An inspector needs to walk up and know what process they're looking at.
Excellent breakdown. Every detail matters, clearly. Okay, finally, let's loop back to material properties and maybe one of the most critical variables in welding heat input. It has such a profound effect, sometimes negative, on the final weld properties. Question 5. The toughness and yield strength of steel is reduced by A, reducing the grain size, B, increasing the heat input, C, reducing the heat input, D, both A and B. So what's the main factor here that can weaken the steel's resistance to impact to deformation?
This question gets right to how welding parameters impact the final product. The correct answer is B, increasing the heat input. The crucial thing to understand here is the chain reaction. Heat input affects cooling rate, which affects the microstructure, specifically grain size. When you pump more heat input into the weld, you're putting more total energy into that area. This naturally means it takes longer to cool down. Slower cooling rates for the weld metal and the HAZ.
Slower cooling. And that leads to?
That leads to larger grain sizes growing in the steel's microstructure. And generally speaking, larger grains are bad news for toughness and yield strength. Think of grain boundaries like little fences inside the material. Smaller grains mean more fences, more boundaries. These boundaries act as barriers, making it harder for cracks to propagate and harder for the material to deform plastically.
So smaller grains are better.
Generally, yes, for toughness and strength. That's actually called the Hall pitch effect. More boundaries, more obstacles, tougher, stronger material. Conversely, larger grains mean fewer boundaries, fewer obstacles. Cracks can run more easily, deformation happens at lower stress. So high heat input promotes those larger, coarser grains, which directly reduces toughness and yield strength. Makes the material more prone to brittle fracture, lowers its load-bearing ability.
Got it. And just to be clear, option A.
Right, option A, reducing the grain size, that actually improves toughness and strength, like we just said. So it does the opposite of reducing them. Knowing this relationship between heat input, cooling rate, grain size, and properties is absolutely vital for engineers and inspectors. It's why you often see maximum heat input limits specified in procedures to control that microstructure and ensure you get the mechanical properties you need.
And there we have it. Wow, we've really taken a focused deep dive today into some truly foundational stuff for the CSWIP 3.1 exam. We've looked at telling fractures apart, preventing tricky defects like lamellar tearing, the impact of carbon, nailing down process ID, and that crucial role of heat input. This kind of learning, getting the why behind it all, it's just invaluable. For the exam, sure, but definitely for your work as an inspector too.
Absolutely spot on. Understanding these core ideas is way more than just exam prep. It's about building that solid foundation for making critical calls out there, ensuring integrity, ensuring safety. It makes you think harder about every choice, every parameter, anticipating problems before they happen. So as you keep learning, maybe think about this. What other seemingly small details in welding? What things do you think have the biggest, maybe unexpected impact on quality and safety down the line? Keep asking those questions.